Hey guys, it's Bree here from Blossom and Branch Farm. I am here today with my lovely helper, Daddy 2. He is going to be helping me to build 3 garden beds. We're going to do a trial where we do 3 different ways to build the bed. We're going to do tilling one bed, we're going to be no dig, establishing the other bed, and we're going to do Lasagna Garden on the 3rd one. We're going to trial them all out and we're going to see how they do come spring. It's rude. Now, fall is a great time to do this because it will let the beds sit over winter, it lets them get moist, it lets the cardboard kind of soak into the ground, and then they're ready to go in the spring. Now, if you try to do these beds and establish these beds right before it's time to plant, it might work, but it's gonna work better if you do it in the fall. Now, why is late fall a good time to be prepping your garden beds? Well, it has to do with the compost that we're using and letting it sit over winter. Letting it sit over winter is just helping to kind of leach out if there's any excess salts, or if the compost we're using is too hot. It helps to let it sit for a few months before we plant into it in the spring. Okay, so we're here at my house. We're in front, so we're in the front yard. We actually have grass growing here right now, and we're going to build all of these new beds over the existing grass. So I want to show you what it looks like to convert some of your lawn or grass area to gardens. The first garden that we're going to do is going to be tilling. So tilling gets a bad rep, especially in obviously no-till or permaculture circles, but tilling sometimes can be a good way and an affordable way to get your garden started the first year. So we're gonna start by tilling our first bed. So I've done my first pass with the tiller, and you can see it's just kind of loosened up some clumps and some clods of grass. And now that I've done that, I'm just gonna go through it. I'm gonna remove most of the clumps, and then I'm gonna do a secondary till. So I just finished my secondary till, which was just to loosen up the remaining grass clumps and clods. So I'm just gonna go through one more time and pull any clumps out. Also make sure you remove any weeds. So I just finished the till version of the bed. So we tilled it twice, removed the grass clumps after each till, and then we went through and we added some compost on top of the soil. This is pretty good, well-aged compost. I'm using the same compost across all 3 beds. But now I'm looking at it and I'm realizing that it looks like I buried someone in my front yard. Now we're gonna plant a cover crop into this one. So we're gonna try to basically bring back the organic matter that we removed from the soil by pulling out all those grass clumps, and we're gonna do a cover crop. I'm going to do a mix of peas, radish, and oats. Okay, so we have our first bed prepped, the till bed, and now we're gonna prep our no-dig bed. So the no-dig bed method includes laying a base layer of cardboard and then building compost on top of that and compacting that. So that's gonna be method 2. Now when you're using cardboard, you do wanna make sure that you're removing any tape, because that tape is going to stay in your ground for a long time. And also you want to use just this plain cardboard, not the printed cardboard that has colors and pictures on it. You just want to use plain cardboard like this and pull off the Now we are not going to use the cover crop in this method because that's not what's recommended when they talk about the no-dig gardening method. So we're just following the recommended methods here. This is my own method that I like to use. This is Charles Dowding's no-dig. So the idea here is that this cardboard is actually going to smother out the grass underneath, and it's going to soften up the soil that is underneath the cardboard. Now I do have my misgivings about this in my climate because it's really dry, but we'll see how it works. Okay, so we have our cardboard down. Now, if you have a lot of weeds or very pernicious weeds, I would recommend doing more than 1 layer of cardboard when you're doing this method, just because the more the merrier. Now, my theory on this practice, and the reason that I really don't do this much at the farm, is because cardboard can sometimes contain ingredients that we don't know, especially with recycling of cardboard. Sometimes now they can contain things like phthalates, and we just want to make sure that we're not putting those things into our soil. So personally, I don't love to use this method. The other downside is that for this method, it takes a lot of compost. So where the other method only used a little bit on top, this one we're gonna do about 6 inches, which is pretty thick, which can get expensive if you're doing a big area. we also don't always know what's in our compost. So as much as I would love to say that every compost is good for your garden, that's just not always the case. And sometimes compost can have stuff in it like PFAS, forever chemicals. If the compost company is using biosludge or biosolids, aka human poop, in their compost, then you're gonna have some stuff in your soil that you don't really want. So that's the downside of no dig. Now, if you can make your own compost at home on this scale and make enough to do these beds, then I think it's a much better option. Anyway, we're gonna go ahead and build it out. We are using OMRI certified organic compost so that I know that there's no biosolids in it, but it was not cheap. All right, let's put it on. So we're just gonna go ahead and spread this out so it's in a nice even layer. I'm gonna need a lot of compost for this, so I'm gonna go get a few more wheelbarrows full. You know, anytime you want to help, anytime is fine. Anytime is a good time to help. So, yeah. Okay, so we now have both beds built. The other two trial methods, we have the tilled garden with the compost and the cover crop. We have our no dig garden in the Charles Dowding style of just cardboard and compost. And then our third is going to be the lasagna garden. So lasagna gardening is a permaculture-based method, and we're gonna start with another layer of cardboard similar to the no dig method. That's gonna serve to smother out the grass. Then we're going to start layering on layers of browns and greens. So leaves, we're going to use some manure, some grass clippings. So the difficult thing, now lasagna gardening, the marketing for it is that it's a really easy way to start a garden bed. Now to me, the lasagna method is the hardest way to start a garden bed because it takes so many inputs. We have to have enough of our greens, we have to have enough of our manure, we have to have enough of all of these different materials to go into this. And if you're doing a big space, that can be a lot of materials. So if you're on a city lot, to try and collect enough of these materials to make these beds might be really difficult. The other downside of lasagna gardening, and the problem that I'm hypothesizing we're going to have, is that there's going to be some nitrogen tie-up happening. So the lasagna garden takes some time to break down. It's not an instant plant-in type of bed. So the method one that I prefer to use here on the farm, where we do a light surface till, remove the grass, do some compost, and then we can cover crop it, or you can plant right into it. I like that because it's an immediate method, so we don't have to do the waiting period. With lasagna gardening, I think in our climate, because we're pretty dry, we're gonna be looking at 6 months to a year before we're able to plant into that garden. So again, if you're starting in the fall and you're in a wetter climate, you might be able to get away with planting into this in the spring. We're still gonna plant into it next spring. We're gonna do the comparison and see what does best. Okay, so we have our grass layer down, our last green layer. So the idea with the lasagna gardening is we're alternating brown and green layers. So browns being the cardboard, dried materials like straw or mulch or wood chips, or you could use dried grass clippings, leaves. Those are browns. Then for the green layers, we're using things like vegetable scraps. We opted not to use vegetable scraps just because we have rat issues here in our area. We also tend to have raccoons. I don't want them digging in my garden. Theoretically, if you buried the vegetable scraps with enough browns, it wouldn't be an issue, but I still have concerns. So we went with fresh grass clippings for the green layers. I've also done a little bit of sheep manure on top of this layer. And we used straw for our browns. So the reason that we use straw is because I grow my own straw here. We grew oats as a cover crop this year. We chopped that down. We're using that as our straw layer. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind with using these specific materials. Please make sure they have not been treated with herbicide. So this is why this method can be a little tricky, because when you're incorporating things, you want to be sure that they're not going to be detrimental to your garden. So if we're adding in straw, which specifically has some major issues with herbicide contamination that can affect your plants in your garden, please be sure that you're using a pesticide-free garden-specific straw. The other thing to bear in mind with grass clippings is the same. So if you're using grass clippings from your yard or from a neighbor's yard, make sure they haven't treated it with any herbicides recently, because that can make its way into your garden, and we definitely don't want to be dealing with that. All right, so we've got brown, green, brown, green. We're going to top with a little bit of the sheep manure, and then we're going to put some compost on top. I'm also going to water this just because our climate tends to be dry, and I want to kind of kickstart this composting process so that maybe it'll be closer to being ready in the spring. So I'm just leveling out this garden bed. I'm gonna add a little bit more on top. I'm just gonna level it out so that it doesn't all slip down the sides. So this is a total of about probably 4 inches of compost that we are putting on top. Okay, so I've now built all 3 beds. We've got our tilled version, our no-dig version, and our lasagna method version. And we're going to let them age over the winter. So that means they're gonna sit, they're gonna get snowed on. Now you could top them with a little bit of leaves, especially if you're in a windy area and you don't want stuff blowing away, but just make sure you weigh down whatever you're using to mulch, if it's something lightweight like leaves or straw, because it'll blow away, usually in the fall or winter anyway. You could tarp this off as well. So if you wanted to wet it and then tarp it for the winter, that would also help things break down and get it ready for spring. I'm not gonna wet down and tarp my tilled garden because I did plant a cover crop into that one, so we want that to be able to grow. We've been wanting to kill the grass in this area for a long time anyway, so I'm really glad that we use this opportunity to do it now. I'm gonna go ahead and now mulch around the bed so that this grass doesn't kind of creep in, and I wanted to kill off this grass anyway, so we're just gonna do a quick little scalp with the weed whacker to just knock down almost all the way to the soil, and then we'll mulch on top and it'll look nice and maybe not so much like 3 bodies in my front yard. I feel like you didn't even help. Like, I feel like you've just been sitting here this whole time. Preliminary thoughts. We've already kind of gone over pros and cons of all these different methods, but I think I've never personally built, this was my first time building lasagna method bed. My thoughts as I was building it was, this is gonna take a long time to break down in my zone, and also there's a lot of variability when it comes to what materials you use. So I think lasagna gardening can be a good method if you have a period of time to wait. So let's say that you have a big yard and you want to convert it all over to vegetable flower production, and you have some time to wait. Then you can do one section, maybe you do one section where you do the till and remove the grass, and then you plant into it, or you can do Charles Dowding's no-dig method if you can get your hands on good quality compost. And you can do it that way in the areas you want to plant immediately, and then do the lasagna method for areas that you want to plant maybe a little bit later, a year or 2 from now, but maybe you're not quite ready yet. So that's where I think lasagna gardening is going to be helpful, is when you have some time to prepare and let it sit and age. I have a feeling in my zone it's going to be a little bit either hot or there might be some nitrogen robbing issues happening as those materials are getting broken down. But quite honestly, at the end of the day, any of these ways to establish your garden bed are going to work. It's just a matter of how long it's going to take, when you're going to be able to plant into it, how good of a soil you're starting with as a baseline. So just, if you want to just do an experiment and just see which one works the best, right? Right. Gardening is an experiment. If you want to find out how our experiment goes, make sure you subscribe below so that you'll get the update as soon as we post it in the spring.